All right. We may have some more coming in, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time and leave plenty of time for questions. So I think we're going to kick it off here. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Nicholas Bulens. I'm a program administrator at the Executive Office of Economic Development, and today I'll be presenting on the fiscal year 25 inland dredging pilot round. The goal of today's session is to provide a walkthrough of the RFP. My colleague Mark Horn is on the webinar with us today, and in the event that I lose video or sound, he will jump in. I'll go over the agenda in just a moment, but wanted to start with a few housekeeping items. So the format of this event is a Microsoft Teams webinar, which means attendees will be muted and cameras will be off for the duration. There will be a Q&A portion, but rather than asking questions out loud, you'll need to use the chat feature to type and submit any questions. You do not need to wait until the end of the presentation to submit a question. You can do that at any time, but we won't respond until we actually get to the Q&A. The slides from today's presentation are already available on Combis, and you can download them at any time. If you encounter any technical difficulties, here are a few things that you potentially can do to work around the issues. Leave and rejoin, basically your classic restart. You can call in using the phone number and conference ID that you see here on the screen. If these numbers don't appear in your registration, you can find them on Combis in the document titled Info Session Joining Instructions. Lastly, you can watch the presentation later on EOED's YouTube channel. Copy of the video or another recording will be uploaded to YouTube in the coming days. So let's dive in. Here's our agenda. We'll start with an overview of the round, its authorization, goals, general ABCs. Next, we'll talk about core requirements, followed by a walkthrough of the application process. We'll discuss the review process as well as the criteria used to evaluate applications. Lastly, we'll wrap up with some helpful tips, and I'll detail the written Q&A process. Now, a quick disclaimer, this is a hefty presentation. It covers a lot of information. If you've already seen the RFP, you know that we are accepting a wide range of proposals, and because each project type has its own niceties, there's a lot to get through. With this in mind, it's going to be very important that you review the RFP in full before you decide to apply. We just cannot cover everything in a single presentation, and I'll be moving at a fairly brisk pace to keep us on time. So please consult that RFP. Here's some brief background information to kick us off. The Mass Dredging Program was launched in 2019 as a standalone capital grant program to support saltwater dredging. In 2022, the state legislature appropriated federal recovery funds for publicly owned lands and lands protected and conserved for public access. Among other things, the funds were authorized for dredging of harbors, bays, and inland waters. So the Mass Dredging Program was offered $4 million from this authorization to pilot a grant round for inland dredging. These are the basic who, what, and how of the round. So who and what are eligible. The round is offering final design and construction grants to municipalities to support dredging of freshwater lakes, ponds, rivers, streams, and drinking water reservoirs, as well as dredging required for the removal of municipal dams. How will awards be made? Grants are being competitively awarded with a focus on projects that are advanced in design and permitting and provide public benefit through restoration or improvements of drinking water storage, recreational boating, ecosystem health, or hazard mitigation. The round is open to all 351 Massachusetts cities and towns. There is a limit of one application per municipality. Dredged areas must be freshwater and publicly owned. Applicants can request funding for the following scopes and in the following amounts. So if your request is for final design and permitting only, the maximum request is $300,000. For construction only requests, and construction is the actual dredging, the max is $2 million. And for requests for essentially all of the above, final design, permitting, and construction, the max is $2.5 million. Applicants can request funds for one of four project types, which are shown here at the bottom of the screen. And the next slide will go into a bit more detail. The project types are drinking water storage, recreational boating, ecosystem health, and dam removal. So you may have immediately thought that any dredging project can have more than one benefit. So more than one purpose, absolutely true. Municipalities have the opportunity in the application to describe overlapping co-benefits, but you do have to choose a primary purpose of your project, and that purpose is going to be your project type. On the slide, you can see a table listing those project types and how each is defined. Please note that in addition to the requirements I just went over in the previous slide, there are additional special requirements for recreational boating and dam removal projects, and I'll cover those in just a few more slides. So because this round is funded with federal recovery funds, no match or cost share is required for an application to be considered. That said, any commitment of a match in the form of non-state funds will be considered and weighed as part of reviews and the recommendation of awards. The key phrase here is non-state funds. So only commitments of non-state dollars will earn you credit for a match. Non-state dollars can include your local municipal funds or bonds, federal grants, and also private cash contributions. Another benefit of the round's funding for the federal recovery funds is an ability to offer multi-year contracts. So the max contract end date for any scope will be December 31st, 2026. AKA halfway through fiscal year 27. In making awards, EOAD may require an earlier end date, and once contracted, EOAD will have sole discretion in determining whether a contract should be extended to the max end date. This slide clarifies what we mean when we say that an applicant can request funding for final design, permitting, and/or construction. So when we say final design and permitting, we're referring to the end product of your work, which we expect would be permitted engineering plans, specifications, and estimates, also called your PS&E. This means that you don't have to have a specific level of design in hand to be considered for funding, but the review committee will certainly consider and weigh the feasibility that you can produce a PS&E within the available contract period. Additionally, when we say construction, we mean 100% bidding and the actual dredging. Please note that projects requesting construction funds will be expected to mobilize no later than June 2026 to be considered for that maximum contract end date. Allowable costs. So the RFP covers these in detail, but for the purposes of this presentation, these are the broad strokes. Allowable costs generally include design, bidding, construction, and construction administration deemed necessary, appropriate, and reasonable for completion of the project. EOAD will have sole discretion in determining allowable costs. EOAD may choose to make awards only for selected costs, and EOAD may choose to make awards for less than an applicant's requested amount. Sometimes these are called partial awards. In terms of what's non-allowable, which means what you cannot use grant money for, these include in-house labor or services performed by municipal staff, purchases of equipment, real property transactions, and feasibility studies or assessments of alternatives to dredging. So if you recall, I said that there are special eligibility requirements related to recreational boating and dam removal projects. This slide covers recreational projects. Applicants can request funding in the category of recreational boating for launch dredging, navigational dredging, or both. Launch dredging is the dredging of an actual boat launch, while navigational dredging is the dredging to improve travel through the water body. So to qualify for launch dredging, the launch facility has to meet these criteria. It must be located on municipally owned land. The facility itself must be owned by either the municipality or the Office of Fishing and Boating Access, with whom the municipality has a land management agreement, and the facility needs to be open to all state residents. And to qualify for navigational dredging, the water body has to have at least one launch facility that meets these criteria. The idea here is that the water body needs to have adequate facilities to support a general boating public, not just the residents of the water body or a single community. Dam removal requirements are a bit more straightforward. The structure must be municipally owned and must be subject to state regulations and requirements. No structure will be considered if it is privately owned, state-owned or operated, federally owned or licensed, or not subject to state regulations. The deadline, applications must be submitted by March 1st, 11:59 p.m. Applications must be submitted online via EOED's submittable platform. So this is a grant management platform with a login. No late submissions will be accepted, no email, paper, or fax submissions. For preparation, municipalities can preview and download a copy of the application in Microsoft Word format on Combis. It's already there. Highly recommend that you consult it. However, this copy is offered as a reference and preparation resource only. No submission of a Word document will be accepted as a formal application. So the application is divided into 5 substantive sections. Your project snapshot is exactly what it sounds like, a quick snapshot of what you're requesting. Location, here you got to identify the project site and provide high-level community context. Cost and funding sources, this is mostly a budget table, but it's also where you discuss any match commitments. Scope and schedule, this section deals with the project's tasks, its sequencing, the timeline, and the overall feasibility and readiness. And then section 5 is your most substantive section, and it's going to vary based on the type of project that you're submitting. So drinking water projects will see one version, recreational projects will see another, and so on. We'll dive more into the details of each version later, but for now, what I want to note is that while Section 5 questions vary among the projects, there are a lot of similarities and overlap, and all the variations are equally weighted when it comes to evaluations, so no project type has an inherent edge over any other. 2 types of application, those required for everyone and those that are conditional. All applicants must submit a site plan. All applicants must submit cost estimates for their work. If you're requesting funding for both design and construction, you need to submit a separate cost estimate for each. Estimate should be as detailed as possible. The word to remember here is itemized. A detailed estimate provides a breakdown of costs or milestones with corresponding prices. Design plans, this attachment depends on your existing level of a design. So if your design is currently less than 25%, you're going to submit your most developed conceptual plan. If your design is 25% or higher, you need to submit your highest level of engineering plans. If you're submitting a joint application, you'll need to include signed statements from the CEO of your fellow municipalities. And the final 2 attachments apply only to dam removal projects. They include your most recent dam inspection report on file with DCR and a climate standards report, which I'll go over on the next slide. So all dam removal projects are required to submit a climate standards report. This report comes from the state's online climate resilience design standards tool. How it works is the applicant registers and logs into the tool, which is available at Resilient Mass. The tool guides you to input basic project information, and then it generates a downloadable report that you just attach to the application. The entire process, not including your registration, should take no more than 15 minutes. And to help you out, the RFP includes an appendix that walks you through step-by-step how to enter a dam removal project. So please consult that appendix. It should make the process even easier. We do recommend that you generate your report as early as possible, at least a few business days before the deadline. This is because if you have technical issues, they may take time to resolve, or we may need to recommend a workaround, both of which can take time. So please plan ahead. All projects have to be submitted through EOED's submittable platform, which is 100% online application project process with a login. First thing to note, again, each submitter or the person that's actually entering in the application needs to have a personal user account. This slide provides some of the screenshots of the process. You'll find the submittable link on the Dredging program's How to Apply page. From there, look for the Submit button next to the Inland Dredging round. At that point, you'll be prompted to sign in, or if you're a new user, you click Sign Up. And if you forgot your password, you can click Forgot and follow the instructions to reset. Once you're logged in, there is a yes or no pre-check question just to make sure you're applying for fresh water and not for salt water. And once you're past the pre-check, you have officially started the application and you can save and return at any time. So here are the high-level steps for submitting an application. I'm not going to read each of them, but I will call out steps 5 and 6. When you prepare to upload your attachments, we recommend that you save them in a common folder on your computer. And most importantly, you should label each file using the naming system that we lay out in the RFP. As you can imagine, the review panel will have a lot of attachments to open, and it's extremely helpful for your project's reviews if attachments can be identified easily and quickly. A few notes about the mechanics of the online application. Some questions are conditional. They'll appear only if you select yes, no, or some specific answer. So read and consider your responses carefully. Watch also for options that say select all that apply. Those selections, of course, matter. Throughout the application, you'll see these icons that call out important details and guidance about what to include in your response to help you out. So read very carefully. You'll also encounter several tables, including a budget table. All of these will auto-calculate for you as necessary. Lastly, most text boxes allow rich text editing, so that means you have bullet points available to you and other functions, so feel welcome to use them. And these text boxes will automatically expand so you can see all the text at once. So let's talk about reviews. Applications will be evaluated based on a set of both common and project-specific criteria. The review panel is going to prepare a list of recommended awards subject to secretary approval and ratification by the governor and lieutenant governor. Any award will be contingent on the successful execution of a grant contract, which is going to integrate all the conditions of the RFP, any commitment letter, and as well as any conditions within that letter. So very important. At the bottom of the screen, this presentation covers many, but not all the evaluation criteria, as I've mentioned. Please consult the RFP for all the details. We cannot cover all the evaluation criteria in a single presentation. So again, common criteria and then project-specific criteria. The common criteria are associated with sections 2 through 4. That's location, cost and funding sources, and scope and schedule. For location, the review panel will consider whether the municipality qualifies as a rural or small town, whether the applicant is an environmental justice community, also called an EJ community, and whether the project is located within an EJ census block group. We'll consider the variety of EJ populations within your community and what percentage of that population resides in the census block group. We'll also consider your municipality's EQV per capita. This is a number calculated by Mass DOR. It basically represents the total real estate value of the municipality divided by its population. Also, if applicable, we'll consider whether the municipality has achieved compliance with the Commonwealth multifamily zoning requirements for MBTA communities. Cost and funding sources. The review panel is going to consider clarity, completeness, and detail of your cost estimates. Remember that keyword itemize. We'll consider whether the project includes any commitment of non-state matching funds. If so, what's the percentage of that match vis-a-vis the project cost, and whether those funds have been secured or are imminent. We'll consider clarity, completeness, detail of the scope and sequencing description that you provide. We'll consider the number of years since the site was last dredged, the shovel readiness of the project if the applicant is requesting construction funds, and of course the overall feasibility that the project scope can be completed within the contract period. So again, the questions that you encounter in section 5 are specific to your project type. So as a result, this is where those project-specific criteria kick in. Each project type has its own considerations, but there are a lot of similarities, and rather than cover every consideration for every project, I've grouped the most similar here. So for each project type, the review panel will consider clarity, completeness, detail, and demonstration of the project need description. We'll consider the community's existing and most relevant planning documents and whether your project is identified as a priority action or recommendation in any reports. We'll consider the existing recreational opportunities around the water body and whether the project builds on or leverages work previously completed under certain grant programs. We'll also consider whether the project coincides with other public improvements and whether the project is likely to generate co-benefits beyond the primary aim of the dredging. So remember, you choose the primary purpose of it, but you also are able to talk about co-benefits. Lastly, for this slide, we'll consider whether the project coincides with your region's resilience needs, and those needs were identified in the state's 2022 climate assessment. Now I'm going to dive into the more distinct criteria for each project type. For drinking water storage, the review panel is considering the following: how well the reservoir's public water suppliers are performing vis-a-vis statewide water conservation standards, as well as the fee structure being used by the water suppliers, the project's expected level of improvement for water storage and its benefits for local new growth and users, the community's existing water conservation strategies vis-a-vis Mass DEP standards and recommendations, the amount of protected open space that abuts the reservoir, the community's use of select smart growth strategies or state-approved economic development tools, and also the community's rate of new growth compared to the statewide and community averages. County averages, apologies. Recreational boating. So the review panel is going to consider the following. Does the water body support a region-wide boating public? So region-wide is looked at based on the capacity of the water body's launch facility, public access to that facility, and the typical users, boats, variety of activities happening in the water body. The review panel will consider the project's estimated level of improvement for boating access or its improvement in navigation for different types of users. We'll also consider the community's use, similar to the water storage, select smart growth strategies or state-approved economic development tools, and the role and significance of recreation-based tourism for the local or regional economies. Lastly, for this side, we're going to consider the type and level of development near the water body and whether that development is consistent with a leisure or recreational destination, which again speaks to kind of recreational-based tourism in the area. Ecosystem health projects, we're going to consider the following: the project's estimated level of improvements for the water body's health, ecological functions, or natural processes, and the ecosystem services provided to the community from those benefits, the types and numbers of strategies planned by the community to maintain or continue to improve the health of the water body after the project, whether the project is going to restore previously allowed recreational uses or activate new uses because of the clean, whether the water body is identified as an impaired water by Mass DEP on its 2022 integrated list of waters, and lastly for this slide, whether the municipality has a comprehensive stormwater bylaw or a set of bylaws that meet statewide requirements. All right, our last project category, dam removal. For these proposals, the review panel will consider the dam size, its hazard potential, overall physical condition, and its spillway flood capacity. So these are all data points that are going to come directly from your most recent dam inspection report, which should be on file with DCR. The review panel will also consider the extent to which the dam is currently out of compliance with state regulations, and will consider the project's estimated level of hazard mitigation improvements. Hazard mitigation, for the purposes of this, is defined as a reduction in risk to life or property or damage to public infrastructure. The panel will also consider downstream land uses, and in particular, if those land uses are primarily multifamily or economic in nature. And lastly, for this slide, we'll consider whether the project engineering does one of the following. Does it integrate climate resilience standards, use best available climate data for Massachusetts, available on Resilient Mass, or does it go above and beyond regulatory minimums? For every dredging round, I like to offer some tips that can help maximize the competitiveness of an application. First, complete all sections to the extent applicable. We simply just can't evaluate what you don't answer. respond completely to each question. Sometimes it can feel like you're repeating information, but that can be okay if doing so is what's needed to answer that question completely. To that end, be sure to read all questions carefully. Look for guidance that tells you what we're looking for and what we should include in your responses. Lastly, not all statements speak for themselves. So when asked or when feasible, support your statements with examples, numbers, information from any professional reports that you have done. That's all great. All right, the written Q&A process. So general questions regarding the RFP will be accepted via electronic mail through January 26th. That's this Friday. Send questions to eohedgrants@mass.gov. I will note that the H is still in this email address. We are now EOED, but we still have the H in the email address. We're working on that, but please make sure that's there. Put the subject line dredging RFP. EOED will respond only to general questions, reserves the right not to respond to any and all. Similar questions may be aggregated and answered by a single response. All formal responses will be posted on Combis in a document. And when you're applying, we will be at our desks until 5 p.m. on the date of the application due, but after 5 p.m., you're on your own, so be aware of that, plan appropriately. And that is the end of the presentation. We're going to move into Q&A. Again, anything that is asked, we will be recording and we'll be putting the official responses on Combis. This is currently recording right now in terms of video. When it comes out, we're going to be taking away the question and answers. So we're going to end that recording now. And thank you for joining and listening. And let's start.